In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about adding titles to your film. So within Premiere, I have an option to make some simple titles that I can apply as a layer on the video. And I can also use Photoshop with Premiere or separately to create titles. All right, so the first thing I'd like to do is set up title safe zone. So making sure that my titles aren't flying outside of the area on the screen where I shouldn't put things. So I'm going to put up safe margins, and that's going to bring a box up over my video. The inner box is my title safe area, and that's the area that I want to keep my titles inside of that box. And the outer area is the action safe area. So if I have titles or anything important like a character's face or something outside of that box, that wouldn't be great. All right, so now that I've got that set up, inside Premiere, I can simply use the text tool. So if you've used any kind of type tool in the past, wherever my playhead is located is where this title is going to drop. So with the text tool selected, so if I select the type tool and I just start selecting right there, and you see that down in the timeline it actually created a graphic, and so that graphic file is editable as a video clip. So if I start writing directed by my name. All right, so that's great. I've got that. I can select it. I could delete things. Now, if I go back to my selection tool, it throws some things around there. It uses whatever system font. So if I double click on that and go to the effects tab, because there's no actual video for it, but if I twirl down text right here, so it's showing up really as an effect within that piece of blank video. At this point, I can select what font I would like to use, and so there's lots of discussion about what sort of fonts are best for video or your film, but something that's very readable is important. So a lot of times we might choose something very clean. This Avenir, there's Futura is very popular for a very clean look. But notice that there are different types of fonts within the type itself. So the condensed medium might not be appropriate, but medium looks very nice, very geometric with a perfectly circled O. And so I can adjust not only the font itself, but how the shape of that font works, whether it's a light or medium or bold. I can change the scale of this text and still dragging that around. And it's creating that piece of video that is completely transparent other than the text itself. The spacing between the letters, the kerning is important, and we'll show you that again inside of Photoshop. But this symbol right here, they're calling it tracking, but graphic designers are going to call it kerning. This is the space between the letters. So as this is more contracted, sometimes in certain fonts you'll find that it looks like they're merging together to create new letters. And so if we space these out a little bit, it might give a little bit of breathing room between each of those. Now, if I have multiple lines of text, like in this case, it's directed by and my name, if I wanted to have more space between those, so if I added a little bit of space between them right there, and that can change also, is slightly different in Photoshop. Down here I've got some options. I can have a shadow perhaps, and how heavy that shadow is. This is nice if I have something like white text on a white background. Let me bring this up over the lamp here. And now I can see that I've created a shadow so that at least I have a chance of making out what that letter is. There can be a background for that. I could add a stroke and change the color of it as well. All right, so once I have this in the right size, in the right shape, and I'm happy about it, in the timeline, I can edit that as a piece of video. Like I said, I can move it around. I could layer it on top of other pieces of text as well. Under File, New, Photoshop File. There is a legacy title still in Premiere, and that's an older title tool that's still around in the version that I'm making this in right now. But perhaps because it is legacy, it will go away at some point. It was never very good. It was like a bad version of Photoshop implemented inside of Premiere. So we're just going to skip that for now. Most folks have been using Photoshop to make title cards since before it was an option to do it within the editing application. So much like when I create a blank video or a matte or an adjustment layer, it's going to create this new Photoshop file that is based on what my sequence settings are. So if I'm working in 4K, it's going to make a 4K Photoshop file. Also, pixel aspect ratio is important. Most of the video that we're shooting these days is based on a square pixel format, but if you're working with some older formats, perhaps your titles will need to be have a different pixel aspect ratio. I haven't seen that for quite some time. All right, it's going to ask me where I would like to save that, and I've created a folder within my project that is for titles. All right, and so I missed that bar, but it automatically imports it into the project, so it's already part of my Premiere project, end credit 02. But now I'm working in Photoshop. I had opened up Photoshop before I started this video, so Photoshop opened very quickly. What I see here is a canvas with a transparent background. The checkerboard pattern right now is showing me in Photoshop that means that this is invisible. But instead of showing me white, it's showing me a checkerboard to signify that. I'm also seeing guides. These light blue lines are my title safe and my picture safe area. So as I'm creating a title within this canvas, I am sure to keep things safe from the edges. Now, a lot of times what I might do, even though I want to maintain the transparency of this particular title, so I want the text to play over video perhaps, I may still put a layer of black because it's hard to work with white text on this checkerboard pattern. So I might just fill in the background with black. I'm going to turn that off later on. So I don't need to worry about it. So I'm going to select the type tool just as we selected the type tool. Notice how the icon is exactly the same in Premiere. And I'm going to click in this space. And again, I'm going to credit myself. All right, so now I've selected that. Now in this case, I had Photoshop open before, so it was already selected for Futura in a medium weight. Now, if this window happens to be gone, the text window, I can click on this icon right here that looks sort of like a folder with some type on it. So if I do that, it's going to bring open this text box window, which has all of the parameters of the text. All right, to select my font and font choices in Photoshop, I pull down from this menu. If I have chosen a font that is unique and not part of the standard Mac build or PC build that you're working on, you may need to load that font on each workstation that you're working with. So again, if I have something very unique in terms of a font that I've purchased or downloaded, I may need to bring that along with the project, along with other assets. So in this case, I'm just gonna select a few fonts here. Again, Avenir, Futura. What we're looking for is something that's very clean and readable. Sometimes for a particular project, we might choose something that has a little bit more of a unique look to it, or if I wanted to have something more handmade or something older, that might be possible. Hopefully you've seen the Avatar font video that I posted, that was made by, it's a Saturday Night Live skit. So looks like, what did they say, off-brand tea or something like that. Those of you that are screenwriters, are, you know, big fans of Courier, which doesn't really work very well as a screen font. I've also seen a lot of movie posters and trailers use the copperplate font, and I'm just not a big fan of it with its small little serifs and all caps. It just feels very aggressive. So take a look and really, you know, make sure that you're judging the font based on the storytelling that you're trying to do, and also on clear, clean lines. So if I chose the Avenir font, and then it may have some additional weights to it. So ultra light, if I wanted it to be very skinny and thin. Let me choose the weight. So there's also beyond bold, there's a heavy version of that, and see how things are starting to bleed together a little bit. I currently have the kerning set to 25, but if we made that 0, the letters are starting to get very squished together. If in Photoshop, it allows me actually to choose a negative amount, and now things are really, really squished together with that heavy font plus a negative kerning. So if I space that out even more. Another cool thing that I've done with kerning occasionally, I'm going to go back to a medium font here, a medium weight. Oops, I didn't want to do that. So if I just select my text here, and I'm selecting it as a separate part from my name, and if I choose a different kerning for that font, so if maybe we leave this at 200, and I want to make the letters of my name come together a little bit smaller, so if we choose something like 180, now my name is taking up the same amount of real estate across as the directed by, so it gives it a nice sense of cleanness. There we go. I might maybe tighten that up just a little bit more, but it looks pretty good. So I'm going to position that. I just use the selection tool, and I could put it directly in the middle. Photoshop is giving me some guides here, telling me that's in the center, and there we go, it flashed. That's in the center. So if I wanted it directly in the center, that would be great. If I wanted this size to be much bigger, again, I'm going to choose the point size there. The defaults really only take me up to 72, and since this is a 4K image, we're going to need a font size that's much larger than that. So I'm going to double that, and we're going to go with 300, but I have to select it first. There we go. So this is what I was talking about in the earlier section. If I have a spacing between the letters here, right now it's set at 270. That's this category right there. So the distance between the letters is set for a font that's 270 points, but I'm using 300. There is an auto option, so that would automatically give me the spacing between letters that fall down and have a tail like Y, and letters that reach the top like L, so that they don't bump into each other. But I could also manually force that to be something greater than, if I wanted to have a little bit more space between the two lines without a carriage return. So that allows me to create some space there. I wanted to talk a little bit about color of fonts and font choices. If I'm going with white, white is great. White on black is going to work just fine. We see many titles like that. But typically, we don't actually use a bright white. If I select all the way up here in the corner and click OK, it has changed, and you may not notice much of a difference on this video. But if I come back and select something that is a little bit to the gray, so now I see the comparison of where I was and where I'm going. And so what this does, because I'm playing this movie most likely on a dark screen in a dark room, that bright white may look too bright. And if I'm doing any kind of movement with my text, it may also cause it to twinkle a little bit. So we don't want that to happen. It makes things look kind of like it's pulsing. So I'm going to click OK on that light gray. It's still going to appear white against that contrast, so it's a nice way to do that. Obviously, I want to choose colors if I am choosing a colored font or colored text, that it doesn't go into the unsafe. So that the exclamation point here is telling me that that might be too out there for displays. Now, obviously, that's changing as we get into higher and higher resolutions and dynamic ranges and so on. But for now, let's be safe. So there we go. Oh, I didn't select anything, so I have to first select it before I can turn it red. There we go. And it is possible for me to add drop shadows and other effects within Photoshop, and sometimes that works great. And sometimes I will choose to do those effects in Premiere instead, so I have final control on it over there. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take it over to Photoshop. Again, I'm going to turn that black layer off so that I can perhaps put this over video, or I could have it play over black within Premiere. Since it's already imported into Premiere, this little asterisk right next to the file name here is going to tell me that, hey, this is in fact in Premiere, but it needs to be saved. So there we go. I'm going to save that. And when I head over to Premiere, it's already available. So if I take and drag this piece of Photoshop on there, there's the text that I was just using. So if I placed this over video, right there, I'm going to see my name on top of the video for this sequence. So if I wanted to add some of those effects that I was talking about, I would select it. We're going to go to the Effects tab, and I'm going to start with Blur. I like to add a little bit of Gaussian blur to my text. And what that does is it makes it feel more like the text is burned into the image and applied to it rather than just a graphic laying on top. It's got a very sharp feeling to it right now, and I would prefer to have it be a little more organic. So if and this is going to depend, the amount is going to depend on how small your font is, how small the text is, how delicate it is. So I'm going to start with 7 in this case. And so what I'm looking for here, if I zoom in on this to 100%, is I'm going to deselect that. And so I see the very sharp edges around the letters now. And then when I apply that blur, it softens the edges around the text. That's really great. If I go further with this, let's say 12, now I really start to feel like maybe my vision is not quite as good as it was on this text. So maybe 12 is too much. Maybe 8 is the right amount. I'm going to go back to fit, and there it is. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is add that drop shadow. So a little shadow that I might want to create. I'm just going to search for drop, and there we go, drop shadow. I'm going to add it to the text. And by default, it threw a little bit of that on there. If I wanted to see shadow only, there it is. The softness, sometimes I like to increase that, so it feels like it's more of a blurred shadow instead of a very harsh and graphic feeling to it. If I wanted this to be really tall shadows, now you see that it has a little bit more weight to it. And then adjusting the opacity, I can even change the color of the shadow. So if I wanted it to be a dark version of that red rather than black itself. All right, so that's going to help it stand out. But at the same time, we've applied a blur to it so that it is blurred as well. I'm not sure if applying the blur after the shadow or before makes a difference, but all right, so in terms of making that text come in or leave, I could apply a simple, again, I'm already in the effects tab. I could apply a simple transition, a cross dissolve on that piece of text. would allow that text to fade in, and that's a pretty simple and fast way to do something like that. If I wanted to keyframe any of the effects on this particular piece, there we go. So I'm lined up there. If I wanted to play with the blur a little bit and have it be very blurry and come into focus and then go out of focus again at the end of the credit, I would set a keyframe. And I can take this stopwatch here and keyframe that. I can keyframe the blur dimensions, all of those different aspects right there. So now I've set a keyframe. So this is a point where I'd like it to be. And then I'm going to go to near the end of that sequence. I'm going to set another keyframe. And then that's where I want it to start to get blurrier. So as it ends, there's my final frame. And where did my blur go? There it is. Premiere always wants to go to the base layer, so whatever the video track is or something like that. So if I went away from that, it is still here. I'm going to choose a keyframe there. And I'm going to choose a keyframe right there. All right, so now I can ramp up this blurriness so it's almost unseeable. So let's just call that 100. All right, and then I'm gonna hop forward to my last one and also set that to 100. So when I play this back at speed, it blurs in, stays at the 8, and then blurs out at the end and goes to the next font, next text, which I'm going to move. There we go. Now, if I didn't want it to drop off so suddenly like that, I could also keyframe and have the opacity set to something very quick. So I have a quick fade out on that. So opacity 100%. And then I'm going to go forward a couple of frames. And we're going to set another keyframe. And that's going to be set to 0. So it's going to gradually, over the course of 3 or 4 frames, fade away rather than just simply cut. And I could do that at the beginning as well if I wanted this as it's de-blurring, if that's a word. I could have it come into go from 0 to 100. So as this comes in, it fades in a little bit and then fades away. In this section, I wanted to take a look. I've created a Photoshop document with multiple layers. And so I have the written and directed by, I have the produced credit, and I have a starring credit. Now I could have all of these active and do some alignment and make sure that I'm using the same font and all of the other design elements. So what I'm going to do right now, I can leave all of them checked on or checked off. It doesn't really matter in this case because I'm going to import the title into Premiere using a different method than I showed you earlier in the video. So I'm going to save this file and I'm going to head over to Premiere, and we can see that this end credit as we had originally created it is now a mess. So I don't necessarily want to use that. So I'm going to import it again, import, and this is the file that we want. It looks like a mess. I'm going to choose import, but in this case, a prompt is going to come up and it's going to ask me, do you want to merge all layers or do I want individual layers? And if so, which layers do I want? So I'm going to deselect the black layer. I'm going to bring the written and directed, produced, and starring. So this is where it's nice to name your layers in Photoshop so that you know what you're bringing in. All right, so when I do this, click OK, it's actually going to bring in a bin into Premiere, and each one of these is a graphic with transparent background, so I can actually place that over video or place it on black video. So in this case, here we go. I can bring up that title card, and that's just what we expect. I can bring the starring title card, and I can bring the produce title card. So these could all be treated as separate elements. Now, another possibility, if I had created it, would be if I wanted to stagger these. Now, again, if I designed them in Photoshop to be played one after another, but on sharing the same screen so that their real estate was as I would expect, then I could work with keyframes and effects to make sure that they're all represented. But I can also work with these independently as a video file. So I can arrange them using the motion tab. I can move this over here and move that down there. I could grab this credit and we could move it over here, and I could move it up here. And this, in the third one, we could move to the right. Now this is some really terrible design, and you'll also notice that my safe margins are not being observed, so I'm also falling outside of there. So please don't make a title that looks like this, but know that it is possible for me to bring in a layered Photoshop document as individual layers so that I can work with it independently.